Iron Lung is a first-person horror exploration game where you man a tiny submarine and photograph points of interest at the bottom of the Sea of Blood. Atmosphere. The opening story makes the game incomprehensibly bleak, explaining how the stars have faded and all life is destined to continue in darkness, and in this seemingly hopeless time you're in a claustrophobic, dark and rust-colored submarine with no viewport. There's such an overwhelming level of sensory deprivation that only generates dread as the sounds of monsters you can't see seem to swim past and crash against the hull of the sub, raising the paranoia with each unearthly groan. The only way you can see what's ahead of you is to use the submarine's camera and view the grainy black and white image, and even then it's difficult to interpret what you're seeing. Needless to say, it's disorientating. There's a tremendous amount of dread and tension as you blindly explore the ocean's floor by adjusting the coordinates and moving backwards and forwards. The slightest contact with the side of the trench is an instant game over. The ticking of the sensors that mark how close you are to the wall is maddening, since you can't see them for yourself and you don't know where you're going. There's a feeling of vulnerability too, with the limited movement and vision to see whatever lurks outside the sub. The concept of digging deeper into the trench and following the map from point to ever narrower and distant coordinates felt like a suicide mission I had no choice but to partake in. I felt genuine panic and fear playing the game. It is overwhelming. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. The game's most frightening moments come from simply moving the submarine, with no real idea where you're steering and having to use the map and visualize where you are, and trying to adjust the coordinates accordingly is immensely stressful. After the first failure and loud jump scare that's caused by crashing the sub, you're on edge from there on out. Each slight misstep or miscalculation can bring about another nerve-shattering jump scare. The further you get, the more things arise to disturb the player. It begins with oxygen warnings and burst valves, and thanks to how thick and tense the atmosphere is, every noise can startle the player and destroy their concentration easily. But besides the few scripted events, the game doesn't utilize as many scares as it does psychological tactics, like moaning coming from the depths and the increasing tension and paranoia when something hits the sub and moves it, disorientating the player once more. Everything continually builds more tension until you make a mistake or you beat the game. That's 2 Harry Masons. Sound design. There are some brief moments of music in the game's short length. Metallic and disparative synth drones provide a deep sadness and isolation to the hopeless voyage, but it's mostly the roaring sound of the engine and the dripping leaks that keep you company, besides of course what lurks outside the sub. The noises do sound familiar, but all of the sound effects that emanate from outside the sub are haunting and eerie, like ghostly whale song. The effects are very lo-fi, just like all of the aesthetics, but they fit in very well. The directional audio is spot on, and using the sub rotation control can point you in the direction of noises that come from outside the sub, and it also does a great job of placing things as they move around outside. The sound design doesn't try anything wild, it's just very, very competent. That's 3 Harry Masons. Gore. There's not really any gore, and there didn't seem to need to be any. That's 4 Harry Masons. story. The game begins by explaining that you're a convict in the time of the Quiet Rapture, a point in time where all the stars are fading away and you're tasked with taking a submarine to the bottom of a blood ocean to photograph points of interest. Doing so will earn your freedom. It's immediately unsettling when you get to these locations and photograph them, as it's difficult to tell what they are, but there's something about the grainy image and barely identifiable formations that make them seem unnaturally creepy. There's a feeling of progression and irreversible actions as you trespass into strange and unmapped territories, with each photograph being more harrowing than the last. But besides a note from a previous explorer who says it's a suicide mission, there's not much more story to it. It raises a lot of questions that it probably doesn't intend to answer, but sets such a bleak and unforgiving tone that enhances the experience greatly, forcing you into a no choice but to keep going scenario. Making the final score 5 out of 5 Harry Masons. Iron Lung is deceptively good. It has the bleakest story of any game I've played thus far, and takes you into a world of tension and dread where every failure is terrifying. Next time we'll be doing the video on gore. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to support the channel on Patreon and get some access to sporadically released reviews, including Sweet 776, Rule of Rose, Until Dawn, and a bunch of other Halloween videos that will be going up as soon as I finish them, then you can support me on Patreon. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I found what made the noises, I did not scream like a banshee or run away with the computer, and I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.